Session of the symposium. In this session, we're going to be hearing from a very diverse set of speakers. We have Dr. Indu Murthy. She's going to be talking about land degradation and desertification, the implication for climate and SDGs. The moderator of the session is Dr. Rafael de Silveira Bueno. Dr. Rafael, are you online?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so we have yeah, perfect. So we have Dr. Rafael, and then we have Dr. Murthy on the call. Before we start the session, I'm just quickly going to read the biography of Dr. Indu Murthy. Dr. Indu Murthy is the sector head in the Climate, Environment, and Sustainability team at C-STEP. She completed her bachelor's in botany from Etiraj College for Women and a master's in botany from University in Burada, where she specialized in forestry and environment, and a PhD in ecology and environmental sciences from the Pocherry University. Prior to joining C-STEP, she worked as a consultant scientist at the India Institute of Science. Our area of interest include climate change mitigation, vulnerability, and risk assessment, adaptation, and climate policy. Dr. Indu is on the governing board of South Asia Consortium for Interdisciplinary Water Resource Studies, known as SAI Water. She is an expert with the UNFCCC roster of experts for India and a member of the Red Cell constituted by the government of Karnataka. She's an associate editor for International Journal of Climate Change Strategies and Management, and academic editor on the +1 and +1 Climate Editorial Board, and a member of the Technical Advisory Committee of the Mahila Abhivruddhi Society. Thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Indu, the floor is yours. Please feel free to share your PowerPoint presentation, and then from there, we go to Q&A from Dr. Rafael. Thank you.
Thank you, Indu K, and hello, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to everyone who've joined from across the world. A very happy World Environment Day to all. Let's just hope that we'll be able to take those small steps which would help us to kind of make the planet Earth. We just have one planet, which we can kind of, safeguard, if not make it a better to begin with. And so we can do what best is needed for the Mother Earth. So yeah, without much ado, I'm going to quickly jump into the topic that I've kind of picked up to talk about, which is the fine interconnection between land degradation and desertification, and how it has large implications for climate and the Sustainable Development Goals. As you will see as we go through, there are multiple connections that would pan out as we talk about. Let's just pause a moment to kind of understand what we actually mean by land degradation and desertification. Now, the what of it is basically, we're talking about extreme degradation that happens in arid, semi-arid, and dry subhumid regions, which can result from various factors, including climate variations and human activities. So as to why this happens, much of it is the way we manage land. Like the chair spoke about, we do not pay enough attention to the very valuable resource that we all depend on, which is land. So the land use practices there is a problem with the way we do manage. Second is population pressure. With an increasing population, the demand for land as a resource, be it for cultivation, be it for building infrastructure, be it for creating new forests, the competition is immense. So there is a lot of pressure on land. And of course, there are a whole bunch of socioeconomic policies also, which kind of drive the changes that are actually happening, which have adverse impacts. And of course, over and above all of these, overarching all of these is climate change. We will definitely talk about the linkage soon. Now, where is it happening? Interestingly, almost every continent, there is enough of impact that we've already kind of seen. And of course, when you look at dry lands, the extent vary anywhere between 60% of the agricultural land being degraded in Australia to as high as 75% of the dry lands being affected in the Caribbean. Asia and is no different, or Africa is no different. It's all about 70%. So when you look at the problem, although we have a tendency to look at each of these issues in isolation, I would just like to draw your attention to the fact that these are very finely interconnected. Yes, we need to diagnose the problem independently, but at the same time, we should not lose sight of the fringe or the interconnections, because any change that you make in one will have repercussions on the other. So what you see here in this particular slide is that, whether we are talking about land degradation or drought, there's a fine interconnection with climate change, and climate change in turn has implications for land and its status. Now, all of these together have impact on the resources that we all depend on. These are all climate sensitive sectors, be it agriculture, be it water, be it forestry. So basically life on Earth is impacted. It could be because of floods, it could be because of the kind of diseases that come in, or definitely because of yield that is impacted and the food security problems that could emerge from it. By and large, if you look at the environment, biodiversity loss, degradation is a huge problem. And then, of course, we do talk about, environmental refugees as well. And all of these together have implications for development per se. And of course, the sustainable development, that's at the heart of everything that we talk about. Now, looking at the linkages between these different aspects that I'm talking about, let's just pause a moment and think about the heat waves that much of the world has been experiencing. Different parts of the world, any continent that you pick up has been experiencing heat waves in the past several months. Droughts have also been reported. And then, of course, the second order impacts of forest fires is also something that we've been experiencing. Now, these changes in the seasonal precipitation patterns are important physical drivers. Precipitation, drought, heat waves, everything are key drivers of land degradation, and they are expected to become more frequent and more severe under a climate change scenario. So, which is why we should be paying attention to the problem today. Secondly, over a quarter of the Earth's ice-free land is already observably degraded, and it affects about close to a 2 billion population. So, which means and a lot of it, about 1.3 billion, is in the global south, which is basically a slightly underdeveloped or the developing world. So it is a cause of concern. And of course, over and above this, you have the human impacts of land degradation in low-income countries, which include increased competition for scarce natural resources or abandonment of lands and migration and displacement. Moving on, let's look at climate change and drought specifically. Now, as I said, the severity, the magnitude of these droughts are projected to increase by every single model that you pick up. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, which all of us are familiar with, looks at 4 different developmental pathways, or representative concentration pathways, as they call it. Simply put, there are different trajectories of development which could lead to varied emissions and varied levels of warming. Now, if you look at the minimal amount of warming that's likely to happen as compared to the year 2000, if you look at the minimal warming scenario, there again, you're looking at a 1.7 degree warmer world. Now, if you look at the worst case scenario, it could be anywhere between 2.6 to 4.8 degrees centigrade. Now, let's not forget, we are talking not just about the human existence, we're talking about life on Earth, right? So obviously, probably we might find ways to adapt. But if the change is pretty much gradual, then there is no problem. But abrupt changes always causes a lot of adverse impacts. Now, in addition to the hotter average temperature, these scenarios also clearly indicate that there would be increasing aridity in the dryland area. So there's going to be disruption to the precipitation patterns at the regional scale, which in turn lead to lesser rainfall, drought, and then land degradation, right? So that's an issue in itself. So obviously, this is going to lead to spatial expansion of drylands, typically which are they're already existent, but more important is there could be new lands also that might become arid over a period of time. Now, so what we very clearly see is that land degradation is a combination of the effects of climate physical processes and then man-made or anthropogenic interference, as we call it, which is the land use practices that we do adopt. Now, climatic change will have direct and indirect effects on land degradation, particularly in the forested and agricultural environments. Now, as I already said, potential increase in heat stress on vegetation will have an adverse impact, and so will soil salinization or an overall decline in the vegetation and biomass. Now, these impacts get exacerbated and then when land degradation occurs. And so it's a vicious loop, one leading to the other and then again impacting it backward. So land degradation obviously can contribute to climate change because it would reduce the carbon sequestration potential in the soils and the vegetation in the affected areas. Indirectly, if you look at it, as I said, agricultural productivity, the kind of crops, the kind of nutrition that accrues into these crops would be impacted, which means we are looking at higher threats of malnutrition, reduced food and water supplies, maybe because of flooding and land degradation, etc. There is also diseases that could spread, respiratory diseases because of atmospheric dust that could arise because of wind erosion, and of course, a whole bunch of infectious diseases because populations begin to migrate when they lose productive land. So ultimately, what happens is that as a result of all these problems all put together, the entire developmental trajectory gets derailed at the end of the day. Every country is working towards development. So this kind of gets completely derailed because of this particular problem. So to kind of put things together, yes, we know that current and future impacts will continue to be impacting, and these are going to be adverse and in low-income countries. Drought and extreme events would damage grazing land, lower yields of feed crops. And then, of course, these specific impacts and outcomes could depend on the systems in question as to how resilient they are, how are they coping with, and what they are able to do. Now, if the question is, what is the world doing? Are there global initiatives? Yes, there are quite a bunch of global initiatives. Whether we are talking about the UN Paris Agreement or the United Nations, Convention on Combating Desertification, or if you're looking at regional initiatives like the Great Green Wall in the Sahel region. So over a period of time, there have been quite a bunch of global initiatives. Despite that, we are where we are. So obviously, what is important is kind of trying to see how do we pull in all this knowledge together and draw on the knowledge of local people, tap local resources, also kind of bring in some kind of early warning systems that are very, very important in these kind of situations, and then address land degradation so that there are positive impacts on the soil carbon storage, biodiversity is protected, there are adequate resources, and of course, the frameworks that we are talking about, the multitude of frameworks that are existing, do kind of put right in the center the sustainable development plans and policies. All of these integrate these together so that the underlying causes are actually, addressed. So this is my last slide. So if we are looking at a problem, so to simply put, if we are looking at an agricultural system, if we are looking at the problem, we need to diagnose the problem. So how do we kind of locate the weak areas, the vulnerable lands, and of course, building awareness, targeting people with land parcels which are about to degrade or at initial levels of degradation will help us to, restore it in a much easier way. The subsequent talks would talk about what are these opportunities, obviously. And then, of course, one needs to kind of come up with a package of practices which is pertinent to the region. And finally, its implementation at the end of the day. So this is what I wanted to kind of share with you all. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Indu. If there are questions from the public,
yes,
you can see here in the chat. Well, by now I have a question. Given the intersection of climate change and land degradation, what are some of the most promising approaches and techniques, both from the point of the methodological point of view, but also educational point of view, to tackle for these traits that we are suffering everywhere?
Yes, thank you, Rafael, for that very important question that we should be talking about. If you're looking at the intersection of land degradation with climate change, one thing that comes to my mind, which is on the top of my head, because I do work with civil society organizations here in India, is agroforestry and afforestation. Now, this is a way to kind of create carbon sinks, but it's also a way to kind of improve the soil quality and bringing parts of the land into tree forestry. It's an adaptation measure because even if your annual crop fails, you're able to get some income from the perennial crop. So it's a great way to kind of adapt. The second is about holistic land management practices that could be incorporated. It could be rotational grazing, some of the community forestry systems, which are basically, the communities come together and come up with this set of rules and regulations. They practice rotational grazing. They talk about cover cropping for improving the soil health or increasing the carbon sequestration and so on and so forth. So I think there are a whole bunch of things. And of course, a whole lot of innovative technologies are also available today to kind of bring in. Of course, the land parcels have to be quite large, but that's really important to kind of keep in mind if you're looking at large tracts of land.
Yes, thank you. And just another quick question, because especially we talk about the costs of restoration or the changing, for example, from a conventional agricultural system to agroforestry system, but sometimes seems that we miss the cost of the degradation. How much does erosion cost or loss of biodiversity? Are you studying or trying to calculate the values of to moving on towards a good land management?
Yeah, I mean, my team here at CSTEP is beginning to start some work. We are in the preliminary stages, although we're not looking at it from the land lens per se, but that's something, it kind of gets folded into the work that we are doing because we're looking at the cost benefits of adaptation. So which means, you do something today versus losing something and coming up with a set of strategies tomorrow. What does it really mean? So I think what we are seeing, the preliminary work suggests that it makes a lot of sense to start addressing the problem today rather than waiting for it to erode what you have today and then come up with a whole bunch of things. So if you wait too long, you might have to think of transformational changes, which is never a win-win for everybody in the system. There are few people who will be able to pull it up, adapt, but there are few others who are left behind. So which is why we need to act today. That's really important.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we have a question from the audience. Wesley Pereira is asking, what is the greening of hillocks? Or how does greening of hillocks contribute to integrated drought management for climate resilience?
Yes, I mean, when you basically are greening hillocks, what you're trying to do is you're preventing soil erosion. You're kind of creating, stronger root systems which hold. So, and ultimately, there's a lot of soil that's held intact out there. And of course, as a result of greening, the microenvironment could also be different. There's a lot of studies that are coming in today which says that the microenvironment changes and the kind of evapotranspiration, the soil moisture that's held would help people to have not very dry lands over a period of time. So drought may be a very kind of a long-term kind of a solution problem that is being addressed. But I would think, soil moisture conservation is definitely the positive side of greening hillocks. And of course, it builds resilience over a period of time.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Indu, for your very nice presentation.